Hey all, and welcome back to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. Today's episode we're going to look at the known Piece of Eden and what effect they had on the game. Now this is going to be a part series. This is part one of I believe 4 parts. I'll have to double check with my scripts in a few days and let you know via social media. A couple of shout outs to Assassin's Creed Fandom Wiki for helping me uncover a few Pieces of Eden facts I missed. Also, this is going to be the first spoiler post I do. This is because it is impossible to write a Piece of Eden script with 0 spoilers. That is because these pieces have some huge lore implications. As I slipped up before, we know that the first piece we're going to talk about is the Apple of Eden. Now, the Apple of Eden is very unique, as it allows the wielder to have multiple abilities. Some of the most common abilities that we've seen in the lore entries is Mind Control, which, spoiler alert, we have seen used by Juno to use Desmond to kill Lucy. We've also seen in flashbacks of the lore that this is what the Aesir used to control mankind, and then they used it until Adam and Eve broke free with the Triple Helix. They also have an ability to create holograms, and now the lifelike holograms I would describe as something similar to hard light projections from Star Trek. Now these, if anyone hasn't watched Star Trek, this is basically a hologram that looks to be real. You know how most holograms have that little glitch here and then you can tell it's fake, whereas hard light projections look, and I think they feel, I can't remember, I haven't seen Star Trek for 8 years now, that they look and feel real, but they're not. And this is kind of a unique way of the developers can introduce Isu by making them hard light projections. The other abilities that we know it can do is project illusions and physical manipulation. This means that the piece of Apple of Eden is one of the most strongest pieces out there and could probably bring an entire government to its knees if used in the wrong hands. I do believe the Pope was using this in Assassin's Creed 2 with a staff that amplified its abilities. The second artifact we're going to look at is an Egyptian artifact that, if you know where to look, there is mentions of it in human mythology outside of the game world, which is kind of cool, and it looks like the developers may be looking at real world sources of inspiration, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a really awesome way to keep doing Assassin's Creed, because we know the history in Assassin's Creed very well ties in with human history, with a bit of developer flair and tricks for fantasy. And that is, and I apologise deeply for my pronunciation, but the Ankh, or Ankh, and this is a simple but powerful piece of Eden, as its main purpose was to temporarily resurrect the dead and to heal others. Now there is an Egyptian mythology story of the Isis using it to resurrect the god Osiris after he was killed by Sect, and then they had one last night of intimacy and then had a child called Horus. I'm believing this is part of the human mythology. It was submitted to me by a friend who likes podcasts and he asked me to mention it, so I do apologise if I've gotten the mythology wrong. I haven't had a lot of time this week to do deep mythology research behind this artifact, so I apologise if my facts are slightly incorrect. The in-game lore is pretty much the same as Egyptian mythology. The Isis used it to protect the kings of Egypt, and used it to resurrect Osiris, spend one last night of intimacy with him, and then Horus was born. The next artifact, I'm going to openly admit, I had no clue. I've played Black Flag, but as I played Black Flag on 360, I wasn't aware at the time of the Evelyn DLC, so I missed this huge chunk, and I'm deeply upset that I missed it. And I have Black Flag on my PS4 now, but I don't have the Evelyn DLC that I'm actually aware of, so I'm going to do some digging and hopefully find it. So for this Piece of Eden, I have relied heavily on Assassin's Creed Wiki to help me, so I will be quoting what they say. And the piece I'm talking about is called the Patient Gibbs Charm. Now, the Patient Gibbs Charm was a piece of Eden owned by the patient's family and was passed down from mother to daughter as an heirloom, and it is said to give its user strength and foresight. In-game, the charm allowed its users to see into all things for a few seconds, allowing them to avoid danger or plan out a suitable course of action. Patient demonstrated the artifact's powers by using it to predict and complete Evelyn's sentences before she could finish them. Now, I haven't added all the history because that's unfair and that is plagiarism. This is just a quote. So if you would like to know more about this artifact, I would highly recommend you nip over to Assassin's Creed Finding Wikia, check it all out, read the whole history of the DLC, as I've had a full read and it is an amazing piece of Eden, and the story behind it is very unique and cool. Now, as I said, it is going to be shorter than normal, and I do apologise that it's so short, but I'm having trouble breathing with my asthma and my cold, and I did not want to deliver a podcast for this week. So it's only a 6-minute podcast. I apologise, but the last piece we're going to discuss today, before I have to nip and grab my inhaler, is the crystal balls, which sounds like one of those things you find on a fair pier and you pay a woman £1 to read your future. But actually, these unique pieces of Eden allow the users to access the Isu Nexus, which allowed the users to talk to Isu through different timelines. This was most famously used by, and really, really sorry if I offend anyone by my pronunciation, but it was originally used by Ratanohotakatun, aka Connor, who used it to speak to Juno, who aided him to find the Grand Temple, as she realised that if she aided him, he would eventually lead Desmond miles to the temple, and anyone who plays through knows that Desmond Miles plays a massively key part in stopping the Second Apocalypse, aka the Great Cataclysm. Sorry, I'm out of breath already. This was very unique because these were meant to be dead, and to have a piece of Eden that allows them to talk through the streams of time is, well, very cool, but also begs the question of how far can the developers go with these pieces of Eden and with Isu? Now we do know with Odyssey there is a lot of references to the Piece of Eden. There's the Spear of Leonidas, which will be announced, discussed more soon, Pyramid of Eden, and I believe Atlantis uses projections, which are also a piece of Eden. I'm not too sure. I've just started the Atlantis DLC and loving it. I'll do more research for the next podcast, I promise, and give you more information. As I said before, I'm truly sorry this is a short podcast. I don't like doing short podcasts because I want to give you as much information as possible. But I am coming down with a cold and I have got asthma and struggling to breathe, so I apologise about that. One thing I'd like to discuss really briefly before I leave is I have an issue where every so often certain podcasts will be removed. This is to keep up space on my hosting site. To negate this issue, I have created a YouTube channel called Let's Talk Assassin's Creed. This is just going to be somewhere where all podcasts will be downloaded and backed up there for life. As YouTube has, I don't think it has any restrictions on how many videos I can host. So if you ever look and you see a video's missing and you're like, oh, I really want to re-listen to it, then swing on by Let's Talk Assassin's Creed YouTube and you'll find the missing episode. Thank you all for tuning in this week. I'm sorry it's so short again. Next week will be part 2 and it'll be a little bit longer and more in depth. I'm going to do a bit more research this week because hopefully I'll feel better. And I have another announcement to make next week. Thank you all for tuning in and I will see you in a week.